Okay, let's get started. So, my name is Patrick Meyer. I am the Illinois Jaycee's budget analyst for 2022. Just a little bit about me. I joined the Jaycees in 2016 as a member of the Highland Jaycees. I served as their treasurer for 2017 and 2018, and their management vice president for 2019. In addition to that, I served as the Region 5 Jaycees treasurer for 2019 and 2020, the Sergeant at Arms for JCI USA in 2019, and the treasurer for the Springfield Jaycees in 2022. In addition to that, I am a former member of the Marine St. Jacob Jaycees. I am a founder and former treasurer of the Larry Jones Memorial Foundation. I am also the 2022 Downtown Springfield Heritage Foundation treasurer. And then professionally, I am an accountant. I've been so for 6.5 years, 3.5 years as a CPA. And then I have my master's degree from Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville. So what is the treasurer's role? The treasurer is mainly responsible for general financial oversight. So doing things like providing financial advice, looking at the chapter's goals, understanding what their both short-term and long-term financial goals are and how we plan that out to achieve those goals. We have another responsibility is funding. So making sure that the chapter has those operational costs covered for every year. So things like insurance expense, storage fees, annual reports with the Secretary of State's office, PO box fees, things like that. So it's your responsibility to make sure that those are paid on time, but also that the chapter has those funds well ahead of time, and that way you're not scrambling at the end. Another area that you're focused on is fundraising and sales. And you do a lot of this by working closely with both your members and your board of directors, specifically your management vice president. Like I said, with the funding, you have to make sure that those funds are there to support those operational costs. And you do those through sponsorships. You can do fundraising ideas. Some are barbecues. You can have raffles. You can partner with local organizations to do sponsorships, partner for meal benefit nights, things like that are great ways to do it. And so I would highly suggest getting with your management vice president, brainstorming those ideas. The final area is really financial planning and budgeting. Like I said earlier, you want to get a good understanding of your chapter's goals, not only that, but also your members' goals. Every board member might have their own separate goals, and they're going to need funding to make those goals happen. So really, it's getting an understanding of those and formulating a plan to reach those goals. And then through budgeting, you constantly monitor those plans and where your chapter is at financially, and reporting back and communicating that back to the board and your membership of, if anything needs to be changed, if anything, things happen. COVID, for example, obviously threw a wrench into a lot of people's budgeting and there are a lot of chapters' financial situation. And those things happen. And so budgeting is really a good way to lay that plan out, and it allows you to adapt very quickly because you already know, or already essentially know what's going to happen for the rest of the year. And then overall, the treasurer has a watchdog role over all aspects of financial management. Like I said, you work closely with the entire board of directors, including the president, chair, secretary, membership, management, and community, to safeguard your organization's finances and to achieve those goals. You are the last line of defense for your chapter's finances. You have to make sure that receipts are kept. All your financial information is reported accurately, and everything is done very ethically. So your duties as a treasurer, the main one that everyone thinks about is writing checks and making deposits, right? And we'll go through these later on further in more detail. But then you also have to depending on your chapter, you have to collect and pay dues. You have to put together your monthly treasurer's report. You have to do a budget for the annual year and monitor it and adapt it if necessary. You have to make sure your annual tax returns are filed on time, and then any other reports. So corporate annual reports need to be filed. If your chapter owns a trailer, it has to have a sticker renewal every year. You have to monitor the chapter funds. Like I said earlier, you have to understand what those goals are for your chapters, and you have to monitor it, make sure those goals are met. You have to make sure that those operational costs are paid, and then just making sure overall that you stay on budget. Next, you have to make sure that you're communicating effectively with your board. Going back to achieving those goals, you have to have a great understanding, and that communication has to be there to achieve those goals. I would typically recommend that you meet with each and every one of your board members, either, quarterly, monthly. If you have chairs of projects, you might meet with them weekly, monthly, depending on, just your situation. But that communication and constant and consistent communication is something that's key to your role. And then finally, you have to understand your chapter's bylaws. You have to get an understanding of, what is your role? What are your powers? What does it take to write a check? Does it have to have membership approval? Does it just need board approval? Do you have to have 2 signers in your account? Things like that. That is really vital, and something that, for me, something that I try to take pride in whenever I become a treasurer for a chapter. So, writing checks. Like I said, this is probably the most consistent role that you'll have as a treasurer. And just as that watchdog mentality, you have to make sure that everything is in order, everything is accurate, and that it's all approved. So for every time that you write a check, I would recommend making sure that you have a receipt or invoice in your hand, or in front of you on a screen. Making sure that dates match up, the amounts match up, your vendors make sense, that proper approval was had. Sometimes in the heat of an event, we can have someone go out and just purchase something at a store real quick just because we need it in that moment. And it's kind of your responsibility to make sure that if you are reimbursing someone for it, was it approved by the project chair? Is it in the budget that was in the PMG? If not, was it approved by the project chair, and does it make sense for the project overall? The second thing, again, it depends on your chapter bylaws, and I would highly recommend it, but making sure that every check that you take out is signed by 2 people. It helps with the control. It's another level of review, and it's making sure that the funds are used correctly. The next would be to record the check. I typically, for me, I have a check register where I write down every check, just that I can provide timely information. I can give our chapter their financial situation in a moment's notice, just by making sure that that check is recorded at the time that I write the checks. Typically, I would have my laptop with me while I'm writing checks, and so in one stack, I'll have a receipt invoice for it. I'll have my checkbook out, and then I'll have my check register up on my laptop, and then it's just an all-one process. It's easy, simple, and then just make sure that everything's recorded on time. The next, the last step that I do is I mark the invoices paid, and I file them away. This prevents any invoices from making sure that they do get paid, and that you don't incur financial charges, you hurt a relationship with the business, anything like that. I date them, so I know that knowing what time it is, or that it was paid on time. I typically write the check number, that way if I need to go back later and match them up, I can. And then I also sign off on it to know who did it, who wrote the check. And then I file them away. Typically it has happened before, where if you're in either membership meeting, board meeting, and somebody asks, what did we spend that money on exactly? Can we look at the invoice and see the breakout? If you're running a soda stand, you want to know how much you sold of each kind. It's a nice thing to know for the next year and be able to plan. So I always try to keep those just for any questions that come up. Collecting and paying dues. Obviously with Blue Up coming in, this may change. And so I'm not gonna keep on it too long. But depending on your chapter, sometimes membership vice presidents handle the invoicing, collecting, and working with Cheryl to pay dues. In some chapters that goes through the treasurer. So just the communication is key, understanding which members are due, when closeout is, when early closeout is going to be, um, you know, and even working with your president if you can't, get somebody to pay an invoice. Just all great tips on what to do. Keys to a successful term. Like I said earlier, ethics is probably the biggest thing as a treasurer. Understanding that again, you work the last line of defense for your chapter's finances. Um, I would always say never, as a common general term, never be afraid to speak up if you don't feel like you're comfortable with doing something. Go to your president, go to your board of directors, go to your chair of the board, and from experience, they're always willing to sit down and talk to you on why something needs to be done if you don't feel comfortable, or if it isn't correct, then they can talk that out with you and then it can get fixed. But ethics is key, and just making sure that again, you are the last line. Your entire chapter trusts you to do the job and to do it ethically. Another thing is being detail oriented. Like I said earlier, is when I look at making sure that those invoices is there and that the correct dates, pay, vendors, amounts, approval, all of that is there is key, because is again key because you want to stay on budget. You want to track it and you want to make sure that your goals for the chapter are met. And so, if you're not being detail oriented, those goals can be missed very easily. And then to kind of go along with the being detail oriented and ethics is making sure that your voice is heard. It's not always going to be easy being in those conversations with your board when telling, somebody's excited about a project, the funds just aren't there. Or if you don't think that the project is a good idea as far as raising money for the chapter, you have to be able to speak up and really just say, hey, I love the idea. I think it's a great idea. Let's see if we can cut costs somewhere, if we can increase revenue somewhere, or what we can actually do to make this better long-term for the chapter. Your next duty is providing monthly treasurer's reports. This allows your membership to track the budget along with you and to track the financial goals along with you throughout the year. As far as timeliness, it's key. It's if you need to adapt and adjust the budget, you need to know right away. You can't know 6 months later that something happened. You can't fix it. There's not enough time in the year. So typically what I will do is I will present the prior month's financial information at that next meeting. So our next board meeting in Springfield is in March. So at that time, I will present the February financial information. Yes, it's, typically 2-3 weeks after the end of the month, but it also allows to make sure that your board has time to review it, ask questions prior to the membership meeting. The next thing that I like to do is making sure that it's clear and concise. Not necessarily focusing on who you paid and specifically on dates, but just overall information on what categories and what projects they're from. Whether it's a fundraising project, community project, to go to insurance, like I said earlier, with PO boxes, storage costs, things like that. Putting those into the categories allows your membership to see where improvements can be made, and your board too. And just making it clear, concise, that you can get through it quickly is great. And then what I do is I have a template that I formed over a couple of years through Excel. And I would highly recommend doing something similar if anyone needs my template. they are more than welcome to have it. My contact information will be at the end of this training. For me, I use Excel. It allows me to setting up formulas. I can, it rolls forward from month to month. It tracks it through annually. So in any moment notice, I can pull up where we're at for the entire year while still doing my monthly treasury report separately. Same thing with the budget. I can pull it up and see where we're at budget compared to actual for the entire year and make sure that we're on goals. So there are accounting software out there. QuickBooks is a great one. Sage is a great one. Quicken is a great one. But they do cost a decent amount of money, and they are currently changing their software, their pricing platform, where it's more of a subscription and not just a one-time fee. So for me, I like to use Excel just to save the chapters the money. So yeah, again, if anyone would like to see my template, just let me know and we can work something out. So at the beginning of the year, you're going to create a budget. Hopefully by this point in the year, it's been pretty close to getting passed, if not passed already. So for the steps of creating a budget, I like to review the prior year financial information, understanding what happened, what's been the trends, where are costs at that we can try to budget for and improve on. Do we need to raise more funds? Have we been losing money the last couple of years? Or we've been putting money away to where we can invest in something? Is there a reason that we did that? Again, with COVID, looking back and understanding, if money was going down, why was it going down, and how big of a role did COVID play in that? And then the next step that I do is once I get an understanding of what's currently going on and what's happened recently, I try to understand what the chapter's needs and plans are for the next year. The CLC plays a big part in that, and understanding what, not only your presidents, but all of your VPs, and even your secretary, treasurer, membership, all of those, what they want to achieve for the year, and how can you help them get their goals, and what's it going to take financially to get those goals met. So once I have that done, once I understand what needs to be happened for next year, or the current year, and what happened the prior year, and what to expect for this year, you can create a budget. Similar to the treasurer's report, I like to make it clear and concise, so that way we can monitor it at all times, and I can pull it up and very quickly, and I can let the board know at a moment's notice where we're at. So again, that's where those templates help a lot. Filing taxes, my favorite thing. So there are two main things when it comes to your filing your taxes for your chapter. So the first one is your annual report. So annually with the Secretary of State's office, you have to file just a one-page report. It's a $10 fee, $3 additional late fee. And all it asks for is typically your basic chapter information. Who are your officers? Where do they live? Just a brief description, any assets that you have, just things like that, very basic. They just essentially want to make sure that you have that our chapter is on the record with the Secretary of State's office and not all of the information is accurate. So that can vary on the timing wise for the year. So for Springfield, we just got ours a few weeks ago, and it's due here in 2 weeks. Other chapters, might not receive it until spring, summer, fall. It just really depends on whenever your chapter was originally established. In addition to the annual report, every chapter has to file what's called a Form 990. It's essentially a income tax return that is given to the IRS. Obviously being a non-for-profit, we don't owe any taxes, but we still have to turn in all of our informational activity over to the IRS every year. So there are 3 different forms that you can file with the state. One's called the Form 990, And the other two that you'll see on the next page are Form 990 EZ and Form 990M. Form 990 is the kind of the catch-all. So these are typically larger non-for-profit organizations. I wouldn't expect, maybe one or two of our chapters would have to file a Form 990 and not qualify for the other two smaller ones. Yeah, I really couldn't think of any that would. But for all three forms, the return is due 4 months and 15 days after the end of the chapter's fiscal year. So if your fiscal year ends on December 31st, your tax return would be due May 15th. If it's on April 30th, it would be September 15th. And the fiscal year, again, similar to the annual report, is going to be based off of, when your chapter was first established, and when their year end actually is. It's not always based on calendar year end. So you might have it for an April 30th, you might have it for June 30th or July 31st, things like that. And so what you would do to figure that out, you would just look back at, hopefully your past treasurer or your chapter has your prior Form 990s that would give you that information and tell you when those are due. For smaller chapters, you have Form 990 EZ. Those are for any chapter that has gross receipts under $200,000 for the year. So that's total money that came into the chapter. In addition to that, you have to have assets under $500,000. So that is anything that the chapter owns: trailers, vehicles, buildings, things like that. Tangible physical goods that are in the chapter's name. So the 990 EZ is very similar to the regular 990. It's just a lot simpler. It still asks for similar information, still asks some of the similar questions, but it's definitely not as intensive and not overwhelming, to me anyway, than a 990 itself is. And then your final one would be your Form 990N. This is for any chapter that has $50,000 or less in income for the year. A lot of smaller chapters are typically going to fall into this. And this one, it's a lot simpler. All that they ask for, the IRS just wants to know your total receipts for the year. And again, as long as it's under 50,000, that's all they ask you. You can go on the IRS's website. If you just do a Google search for IRS Form 990N e-file, then it'll typically come right up. And it's just you log in and you type in your receipt number and then hit enter. And that's all you have to do. So overall, again, we're going back to watching the chapter funds is a big thing that you have to do. Similar, again, you have to go back and use the prior year financial information to understand what's going to happen. Now, understanding when your insurance premiums are going to be coming in and making sure that those funds are there. When are dues going to be coming out of your chapter and into the state's account? When your PO box renewals are, when if you have large projects that make a lot of money or cause community events that you do donate some money, when are those happening, and making sure that you are prepared for those financially for it. Especially with things like making sure projects run smoothly. Are you going to need checks for a certain day coming up? Do you need startup? Do you expect multiple deposits that you're going to have to make sure that you keep track of and make sure it gets to the bank on time? Things like that. Again, understanding the chapter's goals. I don't think I can reiterate this enough. It's crucial that you take the time to understand your chapter's goals, both as a whole and at each individual board member's levels, and what they want to do, and working with them to develop a plan to reach those goals. Again, it's the meeting with them monthly, quarterly, things like that, just updating them on, where you're at. Have your goals changed for the year? Do we think that your goals are realistic? Do we think we can reach for more? Things like that. And then you do that again through monitoring the budget and just keeping track just on where you're at for the year financially. Are you looking like you're going to meet the goals? Do we need to have more fundraisers? Do we afford to donate more? Things like that. And then again, what the do is just making sure that dues money that comes in does not get spent and then it's held aside for, when the dues are paid out to the state. That's always, I've been in a few chapters where that kind of happens, and it can get a little sticky around certain times of the year with, if money needs to come over from savings accounts or if fundraisers need to be run. So another big thing for me is communication. I cannot say this enough. Talking to your board members, it could be worth having meetings individually with them in December, January, and sitting down again, understanding what their goals are, where they feel like the chapter can improve on. Same thing with project chairs. Where can we improve on projects? What can we do to raise more money? What can we do to rate, lower costs? How can we bring more money back to the chapter and help the chapter grow? And then also with members, sit down. What are their interests for the year? Do they want to raise money for a certain cause? Do they want to bring money back to the chapter? Do they want to have certain trainings? Do they want to be able to, support certain causes or run certain advertisements or reach out to certain areas that are going to cost money? And so I think it's a great idea to sit down. You can do this along with your membership and your president and just understanding what each individual member wants to do and developing the plan with them on how to achieve those goals. Chapter bylaws. So whenever you join the Jaycees, you should have been given a copy of your chapter's bylaws. And if you haven't, please reach out to your chapter president to get a copy of that. It's very important to understand what you can and can't do. If you do have those, I typically like to review those early on in the year to get an understanding of, do you need certain approval for certain amounts of checks? There are restrictions on who can be signers on the bank accounts. Are there powers that you can make sure that projects don't happen if you don't need to? Are there certain relationship things that happen? Can a VP and a treasurer be related? And can be same signers in the accounts, things like that. Understanding, do you need quorum? Do you need a financial committee? How quickly do you need to pass the budget? Things like that are crucial and for your year. And then, after you understand what those are and what what you can and can't do, also try to take a look at, where are strengths, where can things be improved? Again, you're the watchdog for the chapter's finances. So being able to sit down and, are there controls that we can put in place to help with the money? If we don't have 2 signers required on our bank account, let's put 1 in there. Do we have a credit card? What are those controls over the credit card? What are the approval process for any reimbursement checks? Do we need to add those in there to make sure that checks aren't written that aren't approved? Are there things that we can do to make sure that invoices are paid and on time, or that they're not double paid? These are all just different things to look out for, and just whenever you're looking through the bylaws. So again, I would always say, if you read something in there and you don't feel comfortable or you don't feel like it's ethical, again, that's when you reach out to your board or reach out to your president or chairman and talk to them and see if there's something that they can be done or changed in the bylaws. So timeline for the treasurer's role. This ideally would start in early December. The first kind of couple steps that you would need to do is making sure that once that new year starts, you switch account signers on all of your bank accounts. For this, you typically just go to the bank, tell them, here are the board minutes that shows who were elected. This is who's going to be coming onto the account. This is who's going to be coming off the account. And then they will typically ask for copies of driver's license of any person that's coming onto the account, and then their social security number. So you would take all of that to the bank. They do a quick little background check on you, just to make sure that there's nothing illegal, no warrants out for your arrest, anything like that. And then they would give you paperwork for you to take back to those people coming on to the account. And they would sign the signature cards, and then you take it in, and then you were pretty well set to start signing checks. And then you also need to make sure that you have access to any necessary software. So PayPal account, online banking account. If you have storage units that need access to, for online bill pay, our PO box, you can pay online. Like I said earlier, with the Form 99DN, you can go on the IRS's website and file that, but you'll obviously need the login information for the chapter. And so starting in December is really when you should start working on just making sure all of those are lined up to be transferred over. Next, I always try to, again, review the chapter bylaws and prior year financial information to understand what happens, why it happens, and then what's currently happening in the organization, and how can we improve on any of those things. Next would be creating and adjusting a budget. Like we talked about earlier, you sit down after you review the chapter bylaws and understood the prior year financial information and understanding your goals of your members, your board, your president, potentially even your chairman. Or reach out to your state president, understand where they think that improvements can be made, or anyone on your state team. Next, depending on the time of the year and when your chapter's fiscal year end is, you would have to file your annual taxes. Again, it's the 4.5 months after the end of your fiscal year. You can file a 6-month extension automatically, and so that would give you 11.5 months. I would highly recommend not waiting that long. I've been in that spot, and things get a little panicky right at the end, especially during tax season. So again, two constant things that you're going to constantly be having to do is making sure that invoices are paid and projects run smoothly. So again, making sure every invoice is approved, that everything matches up, that everything is paid on time, that it's not double paid, and then you have to make sure projects run smoothly. Was everything going to budget? Was startup ready to go? Did you have to go out and get any other change during the event? Making sure all the money is deposited and recorded accurately, and working with your chapter chair to make improvements and monitor the process as you go along. Next, you would also every month have to prepare a monthly treasurer's report. So I typically, again, because I do it the prior month for the next month's meeting, I'm able to have treasurer's reports ready to go on the 1st of that month. And again, using a template like Excel or using software like Sage, Quicken, things like that, a great, easy way that you can track it throughout the month. That way on the 1st, it's literally just printing off a report. That's all you have to do. And then typically like I said earlier, in December, you would start the transition process for your next treasurer. Creating a document that would have instructions on what to do on when things need to be filed, any login information, anything that they should know about how much dues are, when they need to be paid, when typically dues are paid out to the state, when annual reports need to be made, when insurance premiums need to be made, trailer registration needs to be transferred over, things like that. So it's a nice thing so that the easy flow from treasurer to treasurer can be very, very smooth. So wanted to go back and revisit what a treasurer is. And the main thing is that you're there for general financial oversight, providing advice to the chapter and to the board, and making sure that their goals are met and that the future of the chapter as well. Um, you know, if you don't pay attention to it, it very quickly can get out of hand, and to where that funding, your next step, is just not there. And then you have to fundraise and do a lot of sales, um, in order to get your chapter back into where it needs to be. And then, you have to financially plan and budget. Again, making sure that those goals are met, and adapting if need be. Again, like COVID happens. Things that, snowstorms, what we're going through right now, sometimes, rain, things like that can, cancel projects, and money that you expect to be there is no longer there. And so sometimes you just have to monitor it, budget it, and adapt at any moment's notice. And then overall, again, the treasurer has you're the watchdog role for the chapter, especially when it comes to finances. You are the last line of defense. You are the voice that needs to speak up if you don't feel comfortable and if you don't feel like it's what's best for the chapter. So, does anyone have any questions? About 15 minutes.
Patrick, would you mind just showing us your spreadsheet template?
I can. So this is my template. Over on the left or the far right, I just included the December 2020 ledger, just so that I could create the treasurer's report for the January meeting. I have the other column is the 2021 budget, or the 2022 budget, and then you see on the 2021 column, I have the 2021 financial information, just so that I could review it, understand where it's at, any changes, any things that Springfield doesn't expect to have this coming year, or additional income that we expect to have, things like that, any adjustments that we need to make. And this is again where sitting down with your board, with your president and your members to get an understanding of what they want to do and what they plan on doing is key to developing a good project. This next column, or the next tab, is the check register for 2022. Over in this FAR category, so again, starting from left to right, I always put the date of when I make the check or make the deposit, any check numbers if need be, whether it was a deposit or if we paid somebody. The debit column is always for money that is coming into the chapter. The credit column is one that for any expenses going out. And then I always keep a running balance for the chapter, just that we can always see at any moment, just what we have in the account. Always track what they're for and what category we have. Again, and then you'll see in a second where so the categories, so on the 2021 comparison, I always keep a date for the entire year, and then a second column for 2021. That way we can compare. So for, you look down the PO box renewal is a great line, right? So we pay that in January. Costs increased by $64 from 2021 to 2022. So that's an easy comparison. And then when we go into next year, whether if goals need to be adjusted or budget needs to be adjusted for the following year, we know where things happen if, whether, we do meet the goals, if we exceed them or don't exceed them, on just kind of where it happened, what happened from the prior year and what changed, and any adjustments that we need to make. So the next tab over is similar to the 2021 comparison, this is where I track the our budget and how much where we're at currently compared to where our overall budget is. Again, so again with the thing with the PO box renewal, we budgeted $182. We spent 182. That was the expense that we were expecting for that to come in. So this is just an easy tool. You know, once the budget's passed, and then you can start providing that. I typically would include that with my treasury report for the month, so that the entire board and membership, you know, has easy access and understanding of where we're at. And then this one is my monthly treasurer's report. This is for our February meeting. And so here, at the very top, I always list on what we started at for the month as far as our account balances. And then in the top under receipts, I put any income that we had coming into our accounts. And then any under disbursements, any expenses that we had coming out. So what that's really nice on is if we look back at our January meetings treasurer's report, I can easily compare and look and say, okay, holiday lights parade brought in $1,226 and $562 went out. And so we clearly made a profit in that off that project. And then this one, it's one that you don't have to do. I sometimes include it because it's nice. I compare it my month to month over year over year. So instead of having the 2021 comparison, we're looking at it as a year as a whole. I can look at it by month. And this is where the template really is a nice thing that helps a lot. You know, if I keep all of this December 2020 treasurer's report, when it comes to December 2021, I can pull them up next to each other and can compare them and see what each project did comparatively month by month. Or if, you know, these came out in December, January for 2022. Next year, it doesn't come out to, you know, early February, you know, why? And understanding the cash flow needs for each month. So, and a lot of this runs together. So the budget versus the actual, I have formulas set up to where it automatically flows. So when I do February's financial information for the treasurer's report, it'll automatically flow through into the tab. So it automatically updates the year-to-date actual for the budget comparison, and then also for the comparison against the 2021 information. The big one, like I said, is the check register. I always try to keep it updated anytime I write something. That way, because what I'll do is I'll use all of these transactions to tie it back to the treasurer's report. That's how I fill it out. And that's why you'll see certain numbers are bolded, because that means that I tied that back to the treasurer's report. So the $5,438 agrees back to my January or February meetings treasury report. Well, yeah. Yeah, again, if anyone would like to have a copy of this, I can easily make a blank copy for a template and send that over.
Thank you very much.